Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here and welcome to Asylos' event on child-specific country of origin information COI research. I'm Fatima Ali and I'm a program manager at Asylos. I'm leading on our thematic research project and this is why we're here today. So this afternoon we're super excited to first of all launch two new exciting research reports. The first one focuses on the situation of children and young people in Sudan, while the second report is a snapshot report on access to rights and services for children and young people in Rwanda. We will be presenting these reports and also welcoming a few of our speakers, and then the event will conclude with a Q&A session. Now, I would like to start with a very warm welcome to our speakers. And we are joined by an incredibly accomplished group of speakers. So thank you for being here. And Alamara, may I ask you to please kick us off and kindly introduce yourself in a couple of sentences?
Yeah, thanks so much, Fatima. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Alamara. I work for Safe Passage International as the joint head of our UK legal and arrivals team. Our work is focused on entry clearance for unaccompanied minors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alamara. And Dina, over to you.
Hello, my name is Dina. I am one of the researchers on this report, and I am from Jordan.
Thank you, Dina. Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm Asylos' other program manager, and I lead on quality of COI, enhancing the quality of COI, and also work closely with Fatima on various things. Yeah, over to the next person.
Thank you, Emily. And Ragaj?
Oh, hello. Thank you so much for all the incredible kind of work you have already been put behind this. It was a privilege to kind of take part on this work. My name is Rajat Jibril. I am the founder and the director of Green Codified Charity. And I also as well work with other NGOs who are based in the UK in various capacities. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Felma Raja. And finally, but not least, Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I am a solicitor at Asylum Aid, and we're a UK-based charity supporting asylum seekers with very complex cases. And we're also involved in a bit of strategic litigation around Rwanda and other bits of the law. Thank you very much for having me.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rebecca. And it's an honor to have all of you speak here today. Right, let's kick off. So I'm sure everyone in the room probably knows us, but just for those who aren't familiar with Asylos, Asylos is a UK registered charity. We research information for asylum claims worldwide, and specifically we research country of origin information, which is referred to as COI. So you'll often hear me say COI moving forward. We do this work by working with 80 plus volunteer researchers in over 25 countries in the world. The aim of our research is to ensure that every refugee has the evidence they need to claim their right to asylum and live in safety. Now, if I can just introduce you to the reason why we are here today, which is the work that I'm leading on. It's called our thematic research project. This essentially allows us to fill COI information gaps on vulnerable populations. So throughout this project, each year we produce one extensive thematic research report, for a vulnerable group of persons seeking asylum. We publish new excerpts alongside existing information to shed light on the circumstances that these individuals may be facing in their home countries. And then lawyers, NGO reps, and decision makers can then use this research to better understand the context from which persons seeking asylums have fled. Additionally, we develop a best practices principles document, which basically is for people conducting COI research on a specific theme that we've worked on. Themes that we've worked on so far include disability, statelessness, and now child-specific. We also publish a detailed handbook on this, and then at the end, we deliver a training module on the theme. So for example, last year's thematic report covered the situation of stateless Palestinians who live in Lebanon, and we developed a handbook specifically for this, along with 6 principles that other researchers can use working on other stateless populations. My colleague Patrick will just drop that report into the chat for people who want to read a bit more about it. This project in particular, Sudan, if I can give you a little bit of a background, the project started in June last year, in which we were aiming to gather current and relevant COI on a specific group of children and young people. So what we did was we consulted with lawyers and charity caseworkers from the UK and the EU, and who helped us identify Sudan as a case study. Additionally, we conducted an unpublished rapid desk review of literature on children and young people. And we also reviewed the UK Home Office country and policy information notes, which were addressing children and unaccompanied minors. To guide our project, we established a steering committee, which is made up of 5 experts with knowledge in children's rights, the UK asylum system, and Sudan itself. The terms of reference for the Sudan report were extended to include extended to include Rwanda to highlight the broader implications of the UK government's agreement with Rwanda, which involves sending migrants who entered the UK without permission to Rwanda without considering their claims for international protection in the UK. My colleague Emily will elaborate on this report shortly. And then we also assembled a team of 14 Asylos research volunteers who are diverse in language and skills. So shout out to all these amazing people who've done this incredible amount of work. And they actually conducted the desk research. Then we interviewed and corresponded with 6 experts who specialize in child protection, as well as Sudan. And another shout out, of course, is to Clifford Chance, who actually assisted us in our top-up research, so that our report is, both of our reports are relevant and up to date. If I can then ask Patrick to please drop the report, so you should be able to read it in your own time. It is quite an extensive report, so I don't expect you to open it now. And let me just briefly introduce you to the report. So this is the cover of it and what it looks like. The report itself is divided into 5 core sections. Each part spotlights a pressing issues relevant to protection claims for children and young people. So as you can see on the screen, the first part is mainly giving you a bit of a background on the conflict and exactly how it impacts on children at the moment. If the legal framework, which is part B, kind of gives you a full background of what kind of conventions Sudan has signed and what their child protection system is like. Part C is very much on the access to basic rights. So here you will be able to find reports on access to food, water, housing, etc. Then we look at Part D. Here we look at special protection measures. We are looking for vulnerable people, so that obviously includes children or victims of trafficking, forced marriage, or who are involved in the armed conflict. And then finally, our last section, is the situation of refugees and internally displaced persons, again, focusing on children. So if I can go into the key findings for you. Now, I won't be going into all the findings of the entire report today, as that would take up your entire afternoon, but we will focus on some key areas that really highlight the impact that this ongoing conflict has had on children and young people in Sudan. So if I can just give you a bit of background, and this is one of the sources that we highlighted in the report, and this is pretty much how the rest of the findings will look for you. So you'll see different reports or interviews that we have included. So on here, you can see that the conflict, of course, started in April 2023, and who the actual key factors are. So you can see that the Sudanese Army Forces, SAF, is headed by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, which is led by Mohammed Hamdan Dalago, known as Hameti. And this started off with both of them respectively being the chairman and the deputy chairman of the Transitional Sovereign Council, which has served Sudan's executive body since August 2019. Then if I can also introduce you to some reports in terms, these are excerpts from our interviews. And here is basically what the picture they're painting is the state of the government or lack of. And here you can see that Matilda Vu, who is from the Norwegian Refugee Council, said that the country is at war and all the governing institutions have been shattered and are currently non-functioning or barely functioning. So the destruction of the capital, as you can basically see, is a de facto government which is in exile in Port Sudan, has not succeeded to re-establish levels of governance. She also highlighted that so while there is some attempt from the Rapid Support Force to establish some type of governance, it's basically been their understanding from Darfur, for example, that nothing is functioning. Eric Reeves, who we also interviewed for this report, also highlighted similar information, going a bit more into detail on the fact that there are no laws, no policies. They just can't be. Who would enforce them? He had questions about how these laws would be implemented during a live conflict. And then if I can also show you a bit more on the direct impact. So here we have a report from Freedom House, dated September 2023, which provides us that more than 13,000 lives have been lost. And this is from September onwards, so it's not now. Homes are razed and 100 displacement sites reduced to ruins. Also, they highlighted rape and other forms of sexual violence were widely used as weapon of war, and these are quite documented quite well in the report, and you'll be able to read on that, as well as the conflict being targeting essential health work, healthcare, electricity, water, telecommunications, and the fuel infrastructure. Also, another aspect that you can see here is that at least 498 children have died from hunger. If I go on to the next report, so more than, according to International Rescue Committee, who was reporting on displacement as well as child endangerment. Here you can see that more than 9 million people have fled their homes, and since the conflict started, creating the world's largest displacement crisis, and this of course includes children. At the end of 2023, at least 435 children have been killed during the conflict. In particular, we'd like to highlight here that unaccompanied children and children who live in extreme poverty have been targeted for recruitment as child soldiers. If I can now provide you with a bit of a background in terms of Sudan's child protection system. So Sudan has committed to some of the key international conventions and protocols on children's rights and human rights, including the Convention on the Rights of a Child, CRC, and its optional protocols. In addition to the international conventions, Sudan's interim national constitution 2005 also looks at human rights, including the rights of the child. And in 2010, they introduced a Child's Act. Most of the reports that we've been finding is that there's clearly an implementation challenges on ineffective justice system. And here, this is an interview from Asma Taha, which is one of our sources that we interviewed. And here she highlights and breaks down exactly how the child system is organized in 3 levels. And she particularly highlights that the system needs capacity building. And this is a serious issue that we've read through the entire report. Then if I can bring you now to risk of statelessness. In here, we have an interview with one of our interviewees, Ramona. Ramona also works for the the Norwegian Refugee Council. And here she highlights and brings to attention that because institutions are virtually paralyzed, including those that are responsible for registering vital events, the fact is that authorities competent to issue them are not functioning, and in the backdrop of the fact that we are at war, which has led to massive waves of displacement. Some of them have gone beyond the border of Sudan, and this significantly increases the chances of those children becoming stateless. So the further they are from the territory that they have a claim to, the closer they are to becoming stateless. I'd like to also quickly look at access to food and water. And here we have a report from Reuters, which is actually a special news report, which really highlights the desperation of civilians. So what you can see in here is that a family in particular who were received in Al-Lati refugee camp, where it's reported that people are now eating dirt, and that at times they go 2 or 3 days without eating. Doctors Without Borders have reported that an estimated 1 child is dying on average every 2 hours in the fast camp named Samsam, which is in the North Darfur, and this is mainly due to risk of disease and malnutrition. And the only factory in Sudan that was making therapeutic food for children suffering from malnutrition was destroyed in the fighting. Here is an interview with the daughter of the factory owner. And here we have, in April this year, Sky News reported that more than 100 settlements were set on fire, with over a quarter targeted more than once. And the highest number of fires took place in Al Guni, which is in the west capital of West Darfur, along with villages in Misliti. Here it's been highlighted as well that the particular villages that were set on fire were mainly inhabited by ethnic minority Misliti people, which also is extensively reported on by Human Rights Watch, that there could be an ethnic cleansing. Here we have the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in a situation report on Sudan, published in August 2023, provided a very detailed account of the current health system in Sudan. The report also presents a picture of the healthcare infrastructure in Sudan amongst the conflict. So basically reading out that 89 main hospitals in the capital and states, out of 89, 71 are out of service, with the remainder at partial capacity. They also highlighted that states that have not witnessed active conflict have also suffering from the lack of supplies, especially as newly displaced people are arriving from the current conflict. And here we also wanted to highlight that an estimated 11 million people in Sudan need urgent health assistance, including about 4 million children and pregnant and breastfeeding women who are acutely malnourished, and more than 100,000 children under the age of 5 with severe acute malnutrition. So it's not a pretty picture, I'm afraid. Here we have an interview with one of our interviewees, Hassan Ahmedberg, who is a Sudanese journalist. And in February, Hassan was able to provide us with this account, where he remembers working on reports on mental health in particular services in Khartoum. And he highlighted the problems prior to the war, where most of the hospitals and medical staff working in this field were all centered in Khartoum, as this was the first spot that was hit and looted. He also highlights that all the hospitals that worked in the field of mental health are now occupied or being looted. And the medical teams that were already a few, most of them have migrated to Gulf countries, with better job offers and salaries. And the final point that Hassan would like to highlight is, of course, that for an example, in the States, as in Gaddafi or Port Sudan, there are some light hospitals, but very simple, and most of them were in Khartoum, so they did not fill the need. If I can briefly touch on child trafficking, here we have a report by Global Partners Governance, which basically provides us with the pre-situation, so providing us with the before the conflict and what the situation was. So numerous forms of trafficking existed in Sudan, which varied between the different regions and demographics. And then if we look at, in particular, the displaced populations and refugees were particularly vulnerable. And the forms of trafficking within Sudan include sexual slavery, recruitment of children into armed groups, forced labor, forced begging, and forced marriages. Okay, and here what we would like to do is mainly highlight the children's voices within this report. So within all of our thematic research, we follow the principle of incorporating the voices of people who directly are affected by the theme of our research on a personal level. As we're not a child protection child protection organization, we did not actually interview any children for this report. However, we did follow our own guidance in the principles document, which Patrick will drop in the chat for you to read a bit more. On researching child-specific COI, we encourage COI researchers or anyone who will be doing this type of research to seek out and prioritize sources that focus on the experience of children and young people with the aim to reflect their direct voices and experience. So here what you can see on the screen is a 1-minute video which has been published by UNICEF in March 2024. All of the recordings here were from 2023, but as you can see, the children, they were interviewed between the ages of 10 and 16. And here we have a couple of direct quotes from that video. So as you can see, for example, children are highlighting that they are losing hope. They're obviously feeling threatened by the bombs that are falling, and in addition to the stray bullets that are killing people. As well as like Hassan, who's 14 years old in Khartoum, expressed that the other aspect, in addition to emotion, is that the depression and anxiety factor. Because this war has gone for so long, he wanted to highlight that, of course, children are also losing hope. So I'm going to stop speaking there because I think everybody's pretty tired of listening to me. So what I'm going to do actually now is invite one of our speakers to join us for a couple of questions. So if I can invite Raga.
Thank you, Fatima. That was really, you covered a lot on that. Yes, it testified to your skills.
Thank you very much, Raja. Thank you very much. What we'll do is now I'll just to reintroduce Raja. So Raja is the founder of Green Kordofan, a charity that works directly with Sudanese children on the borders of Sudan and South Sudan. But Raja was also one of our committee members, so she also worked directly on the project. And my first question to you, Raja, is if you could just maybe provide us an introduction to Green Kordofan and where the inspiration came off when you launched this charity.
Thank you so much. Again, where the inspiration come from? In all honesty, the sheer mass of the humanitarian situation was just a major drive. I'm originally from Sudan, and I live with the community. Living on diaspora in particular, it kind of makes you quite more sensitive as well to kind of fear for family, fear for friends, fear for all the links and ties that we kind of bind us still to the country. So beyond kind of April 15, beyond the the split between Sudan and South Sudan 2011, I was in Sudan myself, and I worked as a journalist, and I covered many areas which was affected at the time by an ongoing conflict for years and years and years. And if I'm honest, as a child, I lived part of that. So kind of my knowledge is actually informed by my own experience, and that the experience of others, and then going on to learn and research on the matter. When I started to think about there is a need to kind of have an organized work, an organization, there is a need to intervene. There was something on me that is kind of basically don't want to intervene in a way that is actually create more harm. The kind of as well, the language, the hostility at the times was, you know, and it was quite clear why people are quite feeling fearful, and why people are quite tense at the time. And so I wanted to have something really to kind of create a different kind of relationship, engage in a way to kind of, so we all together could actually help the mass displaced people. At the time when I started Green Codifying, that was literally as I was finishing my master degree in October 2010. And that's from Reading University. I did some work in Sudan as I was researching, and I was specifically working in the Nuba Mountains area. And so witnessed that the new people who are actually being returned to the area. I think we might not be able to kind of cover that, but there was an IOM report on returnees from Khartoum, the outskirts of Sudan, which was kind of really populated by people who were previously displaced by war in the 80s and ongoing 90s and this and that. Almost most of them are vulnerable women and children. They've been put in an area where, you know, as well had a lot of challenges. There is challenge for security. There is challenge as well for accessing food and this and that. But there was kind of a little hope that's of peace, which was a short-lived. And as I said, you know, period to 2011, there was other conflict in Sudan creating more problem. And the country was already kind of very, very, very vulnerable. It's sad to see that the war, which was in the margins, as some of us like to call them, has actually developed to engulf the whole country, as we can see today. So Green Codifying, actually, the intervention happens because of that need. And we worked with children who are trapped on the borders between Sudan and South Sudan. There is a mass security issues at the time. There is less support. There is fears from the people and resistance to be removed to other places. And we decided to work with the people, decided to come with solution with the people, decided to have a means, as I said, a peaceful means to engage. Sport was the right stuff. Just by practice, it happened to be, you know. And then we started small. You know, suddenly the numbers of children that we're supporting become 1,000. Because of what happens in Khartoum, we now twofold, like 2,000 children, just like that. And there is still more demands. We are very much aware of the challenge, but it's you know, we already kind of started the work, and we're keen to still to continue to work with them, to try to continue to use peaceful means, create relationship, which is hopefully at the end, at some day, could be fruitful and help to the maintenance of the peace in the whole area. At the end of the day, that, you know, there must be a way to end this war, and that, you know, but we just need to work all together to make everyone be aware that peace in Sudan is important for the rest of the world. I am really bothered by the short-term deficit of attention from the rest of the world, and that is why I was so excited when you asked me to join, and when I learned there is some people who are specifically taking an interest to create or to do a research on child-specific, where information is really short and the needs is really dire. So I hope I answered that.
Absolutely, thank you. It's really interesting to also, like, I know, but everybody else needs to know exactly like why that was created and why you're so passionately attached to this theme that we're working on. And another question I have for you was to learn a bit more about your experience with working with Asylos and being on the steering committee in particular. Do you have any reflections on that?
Let me start with saying you're a very caring group, and we did work on this at a very difficult situation as we kind of with Sudan work. I mean, we're working during a very tough time. Most of our researchers on the ground were struggling, and I'm here as well. I did struggle as well too. So it's a chance to say thank you for all of you at the team, and that's you've been very attentive and listening as well. Again, I don't really see many kind of child-specific research, and this just comes at the right time with a lot of young unaccompanied minors coming to the UK, in particular. From my other kind of work experience, I did really recognize the needs for it and the struggles of the various agencies who are working with unaccompanied minors to access the appropriate information, and with kind of the difficulties of finding solicitors as well. That has made this as well very important for whoever is actually working with children to know exactly where to look at, and is, you know, you got children who have been multiple times being displaced and gone on through a horrific long journey, and as the report really kind of rightly kind of mentioned, that access to documents is quite really difficult, as all the kind of infrastructure was broke down. You know, there is no law and orders. There is no one to serve these documents, or you know, an easiness to get access to these places to kind of find them. But as a matter of fact, Sudan has gone through it for quite a long time, and there is a lot of kind of areas in Sudan where this document is a kind of luxury. Not everyone is able to obtain this kind of document. I don't believe that you know, children from some rural areas were actually able to see even their birthday certificate at all, because it costs you money to get it. And so if the money has to be between saving a woman's life to get the midwife to give birth or getting the certificate, I'm quite sure you would choose one thing, and it's between feeding the child or doing that. So it's good that, you know, all this information been highlighted, that the people could understand the infrastructure in the country and what the country is actually capable of. There is so much work need to be done in that country when things are get calmer, but the truth is this information is important and we needed it.
Absolutely. Well put, Rega. And as on behalf of Asylos, I would like to definitely say thank you very much for your expertise. Your personal experience has definitely enriched this report. And without that valuable knowledge, we would not have been able to, I think, focus on certain areas the way we would have if we had done this without your knowledge. So I definitely would like to echo that again and say thank you very much for joining us on this journey. And we are pleased to have you work alongside us. And then if I can now ask Alamara to join us. Alamara is, as she's introduced herself, of course, from Safe Passage. But Alamara, the question I have for you is, we've just been talking about children who are on the border of Sudan. And we're just wondering, in terms of family reunification, etc., we can go into that, but maybe you can give us what the scope of Safe Passage's work is, and if you could kind of detail that for us today, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fatima and Rega. It was really fascinating listening to you speak. So Safe Passage, our remit is to support unaccompanied minors in the family reunion process. The inception of the organisation was in the Calais jungle many years ago, and it was kind of to support children in the Calais jungle who wanted to reunite with family members in the UK. Since then, our work has expanded. We have sort of 3 offices. One is based in the UK, one in France, one in Greece. All of our work encompasses family reunion, predominantly for unaccompanied minors. But obviously the focus of the work of the UK legal team has shifted considerably post-Brexit. So whilst there is a legal framework which family reunion can take place within the EU, which is the Dublin regulation, which allows children with family members in other EU countries to be transferred to those countries to have their asylum claims considered, that obviously no longer applies. So the remit of the work for, say, the UK legal team is essentially doing entry clearance applications, which is basically just visa applications for these children to reunite with family members in the UK. In the last few years, we've kind of developed focused responses to conflicts, which included Afghan conflict arising from the Taliban takeover in August 2021, and the Ukraine response. And we are now in the process of developing a Sudan project, which ultimately aims to deal with those who've been displaced by the most recent conflict, and support them with family reunion for those who have family members in the UK. Be limited to unaccompanied minors, so our kind of specific conflict response project, so to speak, include all individuals who've been affected or displaced, who have family members in the UK. We assist them to reunite. So on those specific projects and on this Sudan project, we aim to include everybody and provide legal representation to anyone who's eligible to make an application to join family members in the UK. So that's the scope of our legal work. And then more broadly, the organisation, we do a huge amount of policy and advocacy work on safe routes. So on specifically, I mean, we do work kind of pan-European work, but in the UK, it's very much focused on lobbying the government, policy, advocacy to promote safe routes, because as I will talk about later, there are in reality not very many safe routes, and those that do work are not fit for purpose. So we do a huge amount of that. And then central to our work is also with young leaders. So we have Safe Passage Young Leaders, who are a group of current and former refugees in the UK, who initially the group was kind of conceived of in order to support our advocacy work. Now they very much are at the heart of our organisation. So they are young people with lived experience who we work with in order to inform our processes, inform our work. They partake at sort of very different levels of the organisation on different areas of our work, whether that's fundraising, whether that's the legal work. But it's very much in order to put those with lived experience at the heart of the organisation and the heart of our work, so that it comes from those people, so that we're not just speaking for these people, we're not working for them, but we're working with them. And it's very important that that informs all areas of our work, even the legal work, which obviously has to be determined by the legal framework, by the laws that are in place. But it's still very important for us to be able to have that informed by people who've been through the process. Particularly to the UK, it's a very, very rigorous process. And the clients are extremely vulnerable. aside from being de facto refugees, they will find themselves in very, very vulnerable circumstances. If they're not unaccompanied minors, they've been displaced, they're usually living in very horrific conditions. So their circumstances are, unimaginable. And so it's very important for us to know how to approach those and handle that situation. So the work of our young leaders and experts by experience, or consultants we've hired from this pool of young leaders to work with us, is very much central to the work of the organisation ultimately.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Alamara. That was very interesting. It's really great to learn, especially about how you are incorporating lived experience and their voice. And we definitely stand by that with all of our work, to be honest, at Asylos, but that's really great to hear that you're also doing it at Safe Passage. I'm now going to invite one of our own researchers, Dina. Can you just jump on? We can't see you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Fatima. I'll just start to reiterate what Raga said. Peace is indeed in Sudan very important for the rest of the world. And that's why I was very honored to be part of this research team. Thank you, Fatima, for doing a great job leading and managing this project and advocating for it from the beginning, building an incredible team of researchers that I'm very proud to be part of. And distributing the information amongst us very clearly and in an organized manner. That's what helped us succeed in our job. And as someone who has since 2015 been working closely with Sudanese refugees in Jordan first, and then came to meet others in Lebanon, Egypt, and read about the situation of those in Tunisia, I've witnessed how their journey was marked by a struggle to claim refugeehood. And despite the horrors many escaped 20 years ago, the international humanitarian system continued to marginalize their struggle and their pressing needs. And so it has been a nightmare witnessing the same atrocities swallow up the whole country for over a year now, and leading to the mass exodus of millions from the country. One main question I had constantly on my mind as I read the news unfolding from Sudan is, how will the humanitarian system treat Sudanese refugees this time around? And it was my hope that if we do our job well as part of this research, especially with the amazing team and capable team that we had, that this report may contribute, even if slightly, to providing the information needed for the millions of Sudanese children and young people now in refuge in neighboring countries to find a path for safety and prosperity whose future currently is in limbo. Another motivation for being part of this research was allowing me to put the time into doing research to learn more from the grassroots initiatives that have taken place in Sudan. I've learned a lot. One of the issues that I was researching, one of the topics that research questions I was working with was on female genital mutilation, FGM. And I came to learn from so many reports led by Sudanese women on fighting this practice, which before that I had not known. So it gave me the opportunity to educate myself about the situation in a country who is right now in a lot of difficult situation, but that there's also a lot to learn from, a lot to hope for in Sudan coming back to peace. I also had the chance through this research to interview one of our interviewers. I interviewed Mr. Hassan Ahmed Berkia, who's a Sudanese journalist and the co-founder of the Sudanese Journalist Network. It was very important for me to have the chance as an Arabic speaker to give a platform for somebody who is in constant daily contact with people on the ground in Sudan. One of the challenges on working in such a research is that you cannot predict the media coverage or how comprehensive the documentation of atrocities could be, or that when they would be published. And so while I was hearing news from my Sudanese friends on what was going on the ground, sometimes I could not find the reports that would prove or document those atrocities. And having the chance to interview Mr. Hassan in Arabic, where he was comfortably sharing the information he had, and I was able to translate it into English and make sure that this report not only gathers the information out there by think tank organizations and media reports, but also document the voices of those who are very active Sudanese activists who are trying to let the world hear what's going on in Sudan, and to realize then how important peace in Sudan is for the rest of the world.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dina. And again, amazing to have Dina as well as the other 13 volunteers at Asylos to work on this. And one of the amazing things about Asylos is the fact that all these volunteers that we work with have so much diversity within them in terms of language and skills that they bring to a project. And they are able to really make sure that every part of information is covered. And that we're able to conduct interviews, as Dina was just saying, in someone's mother tongue is absolutely vital, so that people are able to express themselves in their tongue without having a translator in the middle and everything being lost in translation. So we're absolutely proud that we have such an amazing network that we can always fall back on and assist us in these points. And what I now would like to do, I am conscious that we're moving along, I would like to welcome my colleague Emily, who will be delivering a part of the work that we were kind of not expecting to take on in this format, but we are absolutely proud of doing so. So I'm just going to hand you over to Emily.
I'm going to pick up on the Rwanda Snapshot report here. So we've got a report called Rwanda, a Snapshot of Access to Rights and Services for Children and Young People. And I'll start by just briefly discussing how the Rwanda report came about. As you've heard, it wasn't necessarily planned. As Asylos was developing the TOR for the Sudan report, so the research questions for the Sudan thematic report covering children, our steering committee rightly raised the issue of the Rwanda policy. And just before going any further in discussing this issue, I'd also like to note the obvious, which is that the situation regarding the Rwanda policy has been very fast moving. And in particular, since the period when we were developing this project, we have had the Supreme Court judgment at the end of last year, then the Safety of Rwanda Act earlier this year, and then, of course, most recently, the announcement of a general election in the UK. And depending on the outcome of that, that may mean that the Rwanda policy is indeed never put into practice. However, we are going to talk about the situation as it currently stands, and specifically the issue that children's charities have raised concerns about the potential for unaccompanied children to be wrongly age assessed as adults and subsequently sent to Rwanda, or for children to be sent to Rwanda with family members. So going back to the report in front of us, there was an acknowledgement among those on our steering committee that children may in different ways be affected by the Rwanda policy, and therefore that is why we did indeed end up looking into this issue. So then, bearing this in mind, the Rwanda Snapshot report looked particularly at what processes and support might be in place in Rwanda to support children who found themselves in such a position. So the final terms of reference covered several areas, which hopefully now you can see on the screen also. So the first is access to fair international protection procedures. Next, access to the asylum system in Rwanda that is child-centered. Rights and liberty and freedom of movement, access to services, statelessness and nationality, and protection-related issues. So delving further into the findings, I will touch on basically the main points, but mainly leave you to digest the report in full in your own time. But the first point to note is that obviously, given the concerns that I've just mentioned, one of the key questions that we had was what age dispute processes might be in place in Rwanda. However, among the sources consulted, we found no specific information about whether Rwanda has a robust age assessment process in line with international standards for determining the age of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And then thinking about next point, which was around child-specific processes within the asylum system. Among the sources consulted, we found no information to indicate that there is a distinct child-specific process in Rwanda for making protection claims and assessing welfare needs comparable to processes in the UK. And indeed, concerns do remain. Probably many of you are aware that concerns remain regarding the procedural fairness of the asylum process in Rwanda in general, which would, if the plan were to go ahead, obviously have a negative impact on children who may have been wrongly removed to Rwanda. And on this point, you may also be aware of the UNHCR's intervention recently on the 10th of June this year in the ongoing legal proceedings around the Rwanda policy, which essentially indicated that they have evidence of ongoing refoulement and other violations, basically in terms of access to the asylum procedure since they first gave evidence. And those kind of incidences have, according to the UNHCR, continued into 2024. Okay, so then moving on to the next point regarding processes within the Rwandan asylum system for separated children specifically, we found very limited information on whether there is support and what that support might look like for children who are separated and turn 18 years old. So in summary of the last 3 points, Asylos encountered significant information gaps when seeking information about whether there are age dispute assessment processes, child-centered asylum processes and support specifically for separated children who turn 18 in Rwanda. With respect to access to services, move on the next slide. With respect to access to services and protections, there was some information, but sources drew information mainly from the current refugee population that reside in refugee camps in Rwanda. The sources observed that refugee children in such circumstances are exposed to sexual and gender-based violence and labor exploitation risks, and highlighted some interventions, particularly delivered by NGOs and international organizations, to protect and assist child survivors of such harm. There are some important points to note in relation to the information which any COI users should bear in mind when reading and digesting what's there. So firstly, as I mentioned, sources mainly focus on the current situation in existing refugee camps, which accommodate refugees from neighbouring countries who are predominantly recognised prima facie as refugees and therefore represent a very different cohort to the one that is proposed to be removed to Rwanda. So it's not necessarily a directly comparable cohort. Some of the information in sources such as, for example, the UNHCR Refugee Response Plan relate to future programmes or interventions rather than the existing situation. And so the extent to which information about future interventions can be said to reflect the current situation on the ground is not known. And also reflecting on COI content available, COI users should bear in mind that some excerpts presented in the report include information from organisations whose independence and capacity to provide unbiased insights are uncertain. And furthermore, in general, there's a lack of independent oversight to verify the provisions described on paper and whether they are functioning effectively in practice. Okay, and just making the last point to bear in mind when you are digesting the information in the report. And in making this last point, I'll also draw your attention to Asylos' principles for conducting child-specific COI research, which recommends that COI researchers focus on incorporating child-specific COI sources, as these will tend to provide much more detailed and nuanced information about the situation of children than a more generic type of COI source. However, in the case of this Rwanda report, it was difficult to find relevant information within child-specific sources. Although, as you will see, some information from sources such as the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child and Save the Children was incorporated. So just before moving on to questions, we do recommend that anyone conducting COI on child-focused issues in general consult the principles document, and there is a really comprehensive list of child-focused sources in that could hopefully help you if you're embarking on your research. But you may wish to also bear in mind that even as in this case, where there are attempts to incorporate those child-specific research COI sources, it may not always be possible. So I'm just going to stop sharing the slides there and turn to our speaker, Rebecca. Just to remind ourselves, Rebecca is a public law supervising solicitor at Asylum Aid and is working closely on Rwanda litigation. So it's great to have her here. And I have a few questions related to the content that we've just been speaking about and the Rwanda situation in general. So firstly, Rebecca, what impact does the Safety of Rwanda Act 2024 have on the protection claims of children or age-disputed young people?
Okay, thank you for having me. And thank you very much for the brilliant work that's been undertaken on these reports. They're incredibly helpful. Your question's a big question. Ultimately, luckily, there have been no removals to Rwanda yet, right? So currently, the Rwanda policy is yet again being litigated. And obviously, as you mentioned, Emily, there's an upcoming general election, which may cause this policy to go away. But what I mean by that is removals to Rwanda. At the same time, we still have horrible, difficult pieces of legislation in place in the country that will make asylum seeking very difficult in the future. But in terms of, if this current government continues on past the 4th of July and a flight goes to Rwanda, there is a real risk of age-disputed young people being sent to Rwanda. And this is just because of the way that the current guidance has been set out. And also, the Rwanda Treaty itself makes provision to deal with age-disputed young people who are sent to Rwanda. So I just want to quickly turn to that. Article 3 of the Rwanda-UK Treaty says that unaccompanied children are not to be transferred to Rwanda, right? However, it also says, and when we talk about unaccompanied children, we mean those under 18, but it also says that any unaccompanied individual who, subsequent to relocation, is deemed to be by a court or tribunal in the UK to either be under the age of 18 or to be treated temporarily as being under the age of 18 shall be returned to the UK. So the treaty itself makes provision for age-disputed children to be returned to the UK, pending, any kind of litigation in the courts as to their age, which is in itself quite disturbing that this is something they've envisaged. There's also our favorite piece of legislation at the moment, which is the Illegal Migration Act. When I say favorite, I mean that as definitely not a favorite. The Illegal Migration Act is semi-in-force. There are elements of it that are already in force. There are elements of it that are not. The removal duty under Section 2 of the Act, which places a duty on civil servants at the Home Office to remove anybody who enters irregularly, not directly from their country of origin, or who use deception to enter the country, etc. Thankfully, that provision isn't in place. Neither is Section 57 of the Act, but Section 57 does say that any judicial review challenge against a negative age assessment is non-suspensive. So this act basically, this provision, although not yet in force, basically makes it possible for a young person who is challenging an age assessment to be sent to a safe third country in line with the Section 2 of the Illegal Migration Act. Again, neither of these sections are in force yet, but we can see the kind of thought process behind these pieces of legislation. And that creates a dangerous situation, right? The rights of these unaccompanied children, age-disputed children, they're not being put at the forefront here. And as Raga also mentioned earlier, there's a lack of, it's difficult to get documentation for children in Sudan. So you're going to get a lot of children arriving in the UK who may not be able to evidence their age, and age disputes are often, about a year or two. Often, that's the dispute. We're not necessarily talking about the Home Office claiming that somebody is 30 when they're 17, although that does happen. But it's often marginal age differences. At the same time, okay, the Illegal Migration Act is not enforced yet, but what we are dealing with is the Nationality and Borders Act, which is enforced. It is the act that is governing current removals to Rwanda. And there's provision in there called the inadmissibility process. And this essentially is a process which, if you get given a notice that your asylum claim will not be considered in the UK because you did not seek asylum in a safe country on your way to the UK, you may be on that basis threatened with removal to Rwanda. Again, nobody's been removed to Rwanda yet, apart from, I think, one person went voluntarily, and I think a couple of refugees volunteered to go to Rwanda from a British overseas territory where they were stuck, but that's been it. So in this guidance, it does not offer enough protection to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and makes provision for a kind of initial Home Office cursory age assessment to be accepted as the age assessment that determines whether or not a young person is transferred to Rwanda, which is very dangerous because we know the Home Office makes very bad age assessments. Happily, I can report that there is a charity, not us, a different charity challenging this bit of the policy. Do keep an eye out on maybe The Guardian or certain newspapers and see if there's any changes there. But yeah, the impact is that the Safety of Rwanda creates a dangerous situation. It's ill thought out, and alongside the IMA and the current guidance, it doesn't look like the Home Office is really energized or feeling motivated to really protect the rights of these unaccompanied asylum-seeking children who may be age disputed. So sorry to say, always a dampener.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that really comprehensive answer. Okay, so thinking more about the family reunion side. So we have another question which touches on the Illegal Migration Act, and that is, what is the impact of the Illegal Migration Act and the Safety of Rwanda Act on family reunion?
Again, you need to stop me if I go on for too long on this, because this is a big one. So and I think Alamara is going to speak a bit more about safe routes. Traditionally, if you've claimed asylum in the UK and you are granted refugee status, traditionally under the immigration rules, you can sponsor your spouse or your child to come to the UK under family reunion provisions. And then it's also possible to make applications for siblings under Article 8 ECHR outside of the immigration rules. However, for you to be able to do that, you need to be a person with refugee status, right? And in their wisdom, this government has come up with the Illegal Migration Act, which I touched upon in my earlier answer. And this act basically decimates this kind of category of the refugee, right? It makes it very, very difficult to get refugee status in the UK. And it applies from those who arrived in the UK on or after the 20th of July 2023, which really impacts on Sudanese people who will have been fleeing the war, right? So the impact essentially is that if you arrived or entered the UK without leave to remain, if you came indirectly from your country where you fear persecution, and you required leave to enter but you didn't have it, you essentially will be subject to this removal duty to a safe third country. Again, like I said, this removal duty is not enforced yet. So the real impact, so if the removal duty is enforced, your asylum claim will just not be admitted and you're going to be sent to whatever safe third country exists. However, the actual impact of it now is that the Home Office is not processing the claims of the people who arrived after the 20th of July 2023. So people aren't being granted asylum, so they can't make family reunion applications, right? They are in a limbo. And the reality is also that if this Section 2 duty is triggered, and people are told they're going to be sent to a safe third country, the amount of people, the number of people arriving per year outstrips the available places in Rwanda, for example. So not everybody will be able to be sent to Rwanda, and then they're going to be placed in a kind of limbo, a kind of endless limbo. It's horrific. And again, they won't be able to make a family reunion application because they'll have no status. There are some very limited forms of status you can get under the Illegal Migration Act. That's not been tested yet. We don't know how that's going to work, and they probably won't include family reunion. And again, this applies to people who arrived in the UK on or after the 20th of July 2023. So it does not look good for family reunion in the UK in the future unless a new government would kind of reverse some of these provisions, which is a bit unclear whether they would do that. Another interesting aspect of the Safety of Rwanda Act is, or a challenge that can be made to it is that you're also not going to be able to apply for family reunion if you're sent to Rwanda to be processed. From what I understand, UNHCR might, from your excellent report, UNHCR might facilitate some family reunion, but from what I understand, the Rwandan government won't. And also you're not going to be able to apply for family reunion under the UK immigration rules. So even if you get asylum, refugee status in Rwanda, it's unclear whether you can reunite with your spouse or your children or your siblings or your parents. So it's looking bleak if these policies carry on, if this government carries on. It's looking really difficult in terms of family reunion from a UK perspective and a UK Rwanda perspective as well.
Thanks, Rebecca. All very bleak, but thank you for sharing your expertise. It's really good to have that kind of up-to-date snapshot of your analysis on these implications. Now moving on to Alamara, we have a question indeed related to family reunion in the UK, particularly post-Brexit. So the question is, what are the challenges faced in family reunion to the UK, particularly post-Brexit, and what safe routes exist?
Thanks, Emily. So what safe routes exist? Short answer is not very many. So as Rebecca mentioned, I mean, historically under UK immigration law, if you are a recognised refugee, you have the right to family reunion. That in and of itself is fairly restrictive. So you can apply, as Rebecca mentioned, either for your spouse or your children to join you. They have to be pre-flight, so they have to have you have to have shown that you were married, or that you had your children, or that they were conceived prior to you leaving the country from which you feared persecution, ostensibly. That route has always existed. It's historically, I'd say in my experience, generally the people making those decisions on those routes have a sort of understanding of the nature of those applications. They understand that, they ultimately are protection-related applications. They understand that the clients are in circumstances in which, they're incredibly vulnerable. They might not have access to official documentation. So the decision-making generally has been relatively flexible around that, and good decisions. And, if you're granted under that route, you get granted leave in line, which means you get granted leave period of time as your sponsor. And then if you meet the rest of the requirements, it means you could then apply for settlement and definite leave at the same time as your sponsor, family member in the UK. Strictly speaking, those are the only kind of family reunion routes that exist under UK immigration rules. And despite kind of various promises pre-Brexit that they were going to set up better, more safe routes, the reality is there aren't. There are other immigration routes under the immigration rules. So you can, if you are a refugee in the UK, sponsor a sibling. Or if you're a British citizen or settlement, you can also sponsor a child who's not your own. Those routes are not fit for purpose. They were routes that were underutilized, barely utilized pre-Brexit, because a lot of the people who might have applied under those routes would have been eligible for a transfer under the EU Dublin regulation, so that they could then just be transferred to the UK and then apply for asylum in and of their own right. Those routes under the immigration rules are hugely restrictive. There are a huge number of requirements, including financial and maintenance requirements. There are requirements to show serious and compelling or exceptional circumstances in those cases. The threshold for that is unknown. The Home Office themselves don't seem to know what the threshold is for that. But in our experience, you basically need to show that you're, in the most dire extreme circumstances, and I'm not sure even then what qualifies, because we've had some horrific cases where they've said that these circumstances aren't serious and compelling enough. Those applications, those routes also have a fee. They have an application fee, which goes from kind of £400 up to £1,800. And then also the immigration health surcharge, which is the fee you pay to cover your NHS costs if your visa is granted. So prohibitively expensive. The decision making is incredibly poor on those routes. I'd say over 90% refused at first instance, because the decision makers don't know how to make the decisions. They don't know how to deal with the evidence. They're requiring and asking for evidence that often is impossible to get, as is the case with people who've fled their homes and their countries. They don't kind of apply the same flexibility that those who deal with the traditional family reunion applications do. So, evidence that would be accepted under more straightforward family reunion cases not being accepted under these cases. So, they are very, very evidence heavy, and there's very little guidance or kind of, supplementary or policies on kind of what these mean. And then there's, inevitably endless procedural barriers. So, aside from the kind of application fees, decision making, it takes a very, very long time. You're looking at often a minimum of at least up to 6 months. Some cases we've had 9 months, a year. Poor decision making means that we have to go to appeal on almost all those cases. Generally, the cases win on appeal because they do have merit, but it means you're spending over 1.5 years trying to get this child or their family member to the UK. Just for something that could have just been approved at first instance. And other procedural barriers, things like they have to attend, in order for your application to be valid, you have to attend a biometrics appointment. So you have to go to a visa centre in order to give your fingerprints and photos. And most people will not have access to a visa centre. If you're in Sudan, the visa centre in Khartoum is closed, as is in Gaza. They don't facilitate your travel to, the Home Office will not facilitate your travel to a visa centre. So ostensibly, you're basically saying to clients, either you try and travel irregularly, or we can do what's called a predetermination request or an exemption, where we say to the Home Office, a decision, if it's positive, they'll figure out a way. But inevitably, you're putting clients in a position where they have to make very difficult journeys, very risky journeys, and they're assuming the risk themselves. And then kind of, if for in and amongst all that, you still don't meet the requirements of these, you can do what Rebecca said, which is an Article 8 application, which is basically an application based on showing that you have family life with the person in the UK. So it's what's called an outside the rules application. Again, these are very, very hard applications to make. They require a huge amount of evidence. And the Home Office generally doesn't like them, so they do quite often. And the Home Office doesn't know how to do a proper Article 8 assessment. It's the Article 8 kind of the test for how you qualify was established in jurisprudence. It's case law, so it's not primary legislation, and it's not in any guidance or policy, but inevitably the decision and how to handle that. So you're dealing with quite high rates of refusal. So kind of that's the shape, the legal framework you're dealing with. There have been exceptions to that, obviously. So, you know, after the Taliban takeover in 2020, in August 2021, there were a couple of schemes that were set up in order to facilitate family reunion. Those schemes were very restrictive. They're now more or less defunct anyway, but they were very restrictive and not everybody qualified under those schemes. And then you will have seen what was set up after Ukraine, which is unprecedented. There has never been a scheme like, I mean, the thing to say about the Ukraine scheme is the government says it's not a protection scheme, so you don't get protection status. You know, they don't recognize necessarily that they're de facto refugees. However, it is an incredibly generous scheme, and that enabled and allowed a lot of people to be able to come to the UK in the UK to seek safety in the UK, which is not something you will see you've seen anywhere else, either in response to Afghanistan, not in the response to Gaza, and certainly not in the response to Sudan. So, you know, and there is no political will either for such a scheme. So I think I saw a question on the chat. I mean, in answer to your question, Fabrice, there isn't a scheme for Sudanese people, and there will not be one. So the only safe routes, so to speak, that exist are those that I've highlighted before. And our project at Safe Passage will be to support Sudanese people in the UK who have family members who've been displaced and impacted by the conflict last year, to make those applications, because they are incredibly complex and complicated, and you just can't expect anyone to be able to do that without legal representation. Plus, given the high rate of refusal, you know, inevitably these people will need legal representation. And I think, you know, to touch upon something that I think a few people here have said earlier, I think, you know, the Sudanese conflict, this most recent one, has certainly been kind of what we call a sort of forgotten war. And I don't think, you know, enough attention was given to it. And when we did our scoping mission to establish whether or not there would be a need for a Sudan project, a project specifically focused on providing support on these applications for Sudanese, you know, we realized that there was this Sudanese community in the UK that just hadn't been mobilized, say, in the same way that the Afghan community may have been. And a lot of it was about information dissemination and letting them know that they had that option. A huge number of the people that we spoke to had no idea that they had these options. And, you know, the options do exist. They are a nightmare. They are not fit for purpose. They are time consuming and expensive, but they do exist. So a huge part of our work initially was basically just trying to mobilize the Sudanese community and say, there are these routes that do exist. You will need help to access them, but they do exist and they're here, and we can help you to access them. But it's not by any means straightforward. And it's not a guarantee of kind of a grant of leave or family reunion overnight, unfortunately. But we very much felt like there was a need, that the Sudanese community needed that help and support, and we wanted to invest the time to do it, even though these applications are incredibly tricky.
Thank you so much, Alamara. It's been really interesting to hear about Safe Passages Sudan project, and we wish you all the best with it.
Thank you.
Now handing back to Fatima for the final part.
Thank you very much, Emily. And thank you very much, Alamara. That was really interesting to listen to. Now we have just over 5 minutes for Q&A. And if I can quickly ask Patrick to assist us with maybe reading out a question or two and see how we can fit them in.
The first one is regarding what kind of recommendations come out of producing these reports, and what are the lessons that we've learned moving forward as Sudanese children have been subjected to heinous crimes since 1983 until now. And so now that it's worse conflict spreading throughout the country, before it was concentrated in certain regions, South Sudan before secession, and Darfur in the early 2000s, and later to the Nuba Mountains from 2011 to 2016. Now, as that's a research question, I'm going to open that mainly to Fatima or Emily. If anyone else feels that they can take this on.
I think in terms of this question, I mean, it's huge recommendations going forward, as Sudanese children have been subjected to horrendous crimes for such a long time. And the conflict is awful, and has received such little interest from international actors has been highlighted by so many. I think obviously Asylos is a research organisation, so we mainly focus, we have a role in terms of research. We're not an advocacy organisation, but certainly in terms of what we can do from the research perspective, it's been amazing to work with individuals such as Raga and others on the steering committee to bring to light basically the situation in Sudan. And actually, we've found that since starting working on this project back in, I think, summer of last year, there really wasn't very much attention on it. But now actually, as this is launched today, we've had something that's quite high up on the headline. The first time I've seen a headline on Sudan actually in a long time. So we're really hoping that by shedding light on the situation and continuing to put research out there, especially working with people and platforming the voices of people who have experience of the situation on the ground, such as Raga and Eric and others that were featured in our report, that we can do our bit. We cannot speak to, I guess, kind of the more political recommendation side, as that's beyond that's outside our research remit, but we certainly can do our bit in terms of shedding light on the situation.
Thank you, Emily. And the second question is, given the insufficiency of COI in Rwanda on children, given its current state of affairs, and particularly what was found and produced by the current report, that could have potential bias and uncertainty, what are the approaches and or mechanisms that the panel or any of the panelists recommend for other researchers to consider in order to get better COI from Rwanda on children in the future? Again, I would probably say that's for us.
Interesting. That's quite a big question, because it means that we haven't really had full time to reflect on our procedure for this project, because it takes time once we do the evaluation. So there are definitely things for us to consider. One of the challenges that we actually came across, which we will definitely be thinking about in the future, is along the lines of interviewing experts or sources while they're in the country of conflict. A lot of the issues that we faced while we were interviewing those experts was that we would, for weeks or months at a time, we would lose communication with them for a number of reasons. One, the SAF decided to take off the internet, so we didn't have access to internet for a very long period. And then another factor that contributes to that is multiple displacements. So, for example, one of our interviewees was originally displaced from Khartoum, and then he was displaced from Kassala, where he moved to now where he is in Gaddafi. So I think this is one of the ones that instantly pop out to me in terms of what lessons we've learned already, and how we would that makes finding COI quite difficult in interviewing individuals who are already in the ground or when there's a live conflict. So that's something for us to reflect on in terms of our methodology and what we can do to hopefully alleviate that. The other issues, what I could do, maybe we can ask Dina also, with 2 minutes over, I think actually it may be something that we reflect on another time, I'm afraid, because we are literally 2 minutes over, and I'm pretty sure everybody else has other activities in their calendars. But I would like to end where we are now and just basically go back to the screen. So first and foremost, thank you to all the speakers who joined us today and were able to reflect with us through this work and provide the expertise through everything that you've experienced as Raga, who has lived experience, but also journalism overview. And we would also like to extend a huge thank you to all of the researchers who made this possible and really made it possible that we were able to produce such an intense report. And of course, all the experts that gave us their time, even though some of them were in the middle of the conflict and still wanted to get this information out. So we would like to take a second just to say thank you to all those people. What's next is mainly we will be now, hopefully in the next month or so, we'll be announcing training sessions that we will put on our website And for those that have registered for this session in particular, who've ticked yes on that box, we will also let you know through email in terms of when the dates will be. The topics on those will be the fundamentals of COI, so the basics of how to conduct COI research, but also much more specific themes such as disability, statelessness, and of course, child Pacific. So on that note, I would like to say thank you again for joining us. We appreciated having you all here. And bye for now, I guess.